Oh, hey, look. My play button from the YouTube arrived. So one of the things you forget when you've been in a hobby for a while is that things that seem obvious to you aren't obvious to everybody else. Since starting this channel, I've had loads of people asking me how to run a DCC campaign, which I've always found funny since I've never considered DCC to be all that different to run than, any other sort of OSR or fancy tabletop role-playing game out there. They've all run similar enough to me that I haven't felt I've needed to change that much in terms of my playstyle or my expectations. But looking at it from an outside perspective, I do totally get it. Like, I think when you're in the DCC hobby for so long, you do forget that a lot of people are both wary of the weird, funky dice that are so prominent, as well as thinking the funnel is the entire game. So today we're going to look at how to run DCC campaigns. Now, I can't cover everything, but I'm going to try and cover, the most common ways people run it and try and answer, the questions I get asked the most. I've done a lot of different sorts of campaigns with it, mostly because I think the loosey-goosey rules kind of allow you to do that, as well as, the community ethos is all about just sort of doing it your own way and just sort of messing around with the rules and seeing what you come up with. I've run a bunch of different campaign styles with DCC. I've run a Planescape campaign, I've run a Mega Dungeon, I've run an Urban campaign, I've run episodic stuff. If you've seen the Pile of Shame campaign, that one was mostly just me hopping from scenario to scenario, which is a weird way to do it. But before we get to the actual running part of the game, I do want to dispel some myths first, because I think some people get stuck on these things, and I don't think they're as big of a deal as people make them out to be. Firstly, you absolutely do not need the funky dice. It really isn't that big of a deal. There's so many ways around it, it's seriously not an issue. The easiest one, I would say, if you just have dice in front of you, is that if you need a D7, for example, just roll the D8 and then re-roll an 8. Very simple way to do it. If you are a group online, or if your group at your physical table allows, tablets, computers, phones, dice rollers and that sort of thing, it's very easy just to type in, r/D7 or D16 or whatever it might be that you might need. And over on Foundry, the people who made the dice tray module have actually made it for DCC as well, so you can actually have a really nice tray that shows you all the dice you might need for DCC. And overall, a lot of times when you're rolling dice, you're going to be rolling normal dice more than the weird dice. They do come up a lot, but you can get around it, and if you do need to make a quick change here and there for, a D5 or a D7, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. The second myth I want to dispel is about running campaigns themselves, and I will get into this deeper later in the video, but right now, I do think there's a lot of people who kind of see the player abilities as campaign ruining abilities, especially when it comes to the wizard and the elf, where they have these crazy powers, but they really aren't as big of a deal as people make them out to be, especially on a long enough timeline. One thing that was probably bad with my Pile of Shame campaign was that, not that it was bad, I should say, but that it might have confused some people or made some people worried if they were already worried about players having lots of power, is that I would top off the players every game between sessions just so they had all their spell burn back, all their luck, or whatever it might have been. Maybe not their luck, but at least their spell burn back and a few other things to make them all topped up, because we were doing sort of a serialized kind of thing. But that's not a regular campaign, but in a sandbox campaign, or just sort of any campaign where you're just following up every episode after every episode, and it's directly continuing, they are going to run out of resources. If you were deep in a dungeon, you're 2 levels down, and you spell burn a bunch, that wizard may have used that stuff then, and might have gotten rid of the big bad, or might have dealt with a big encounter. They still have to get home, they still have to get through other encounters, they might still have to do other things. I think there's this big worry that they're so imbalanced they're just going to ruin everything you have, but on that long timeline, you have patrons who are going to ask for stuff, they might have rent to pay, there might be a story, just a natural narrative ticking clock where they can't really sit down and let all their spell burn come back over the course of a month. So a lot of those things do balance themselves out on a long enough timeline. I will admit, in a one-shot, yes, absolutely, they are super broken, but if you are running a DCC one-shot, you kind of know what you're getting into, and there's usually enough encounters along the way in a lot of the modules to, start taking down some of their points and that sort of thing. I really don't think the abilities are as bad as people make them out to be, especially in a campaign. You don't need to worry about that much, because the luck will run out. The physical stats from the wizards and the elves will also eventually run out. They are not really endurance runners overall, they are sprinters, and on a long enough timeline, it'll be okay. With that said, I do think if you are wanting to run DCC, you just need to get in the mindset that the unbalanced part is part of the game. I don't ever want to tell anybody not to play something, but I will say I do think some people are taking sort of 5e or Worlds Outnumber or Pathfinder mindsets to DCC and kind of going this is unbalanced, this needs to balance out, this and that. And that's just not what the system's for. The system's not based around builds and you guys all make your stuff and then you balance out the encounters versus, what you have. It's really not meant to be like that. And I don't want to tell anybody to, find a different game. But I will say, if you are looking for something like that, there are other games out there that are much better suited for that. I think it's just a matter of expectations. If you bring a 5e mindset to Call of Cthulhu, you're going to have the same problems as bringing it to DCC or anything else that doesn't fit for us. That it's a different game, it's going for a different thing. DCC has the problem that it's in the same genre, so a lot of people coming from D&D might still go like, oh, I'm going to bring what I brought there into here, and that can work in some ways, but in other ways, it's not going to work at all. And the last little bit of preamble I want to do before we get into the actual meat of the video is tone. Tone, to me, is one of the most important things you need to establish as a game master when running a tabletop RPG, regardless of what it is. As much as I love memes like this, that I do think are pretty accurate for what the game is like, I do think it has skewed the perception of what the game has to offer. DCC doesn't have to be a bunch of people in a wizard van going across the stars taking cosmic bong hits. You can make it a lot more grounded and a lot more gritty. I mean, the mechanics are already there for it to be grounded and gritty if you want to do that. Because even though DCC has probably made me laugh more than any other system, I have also had seriously emotional moments in campaigns that have just sprouted organically. And I wouldn't say it's because of the system. I mean, a lot of it is because of the players I was with. But in one DCC Landmark game I had, there was this sort of miscommunication going on between two players over different encounters and sessions, where it finally came to a boiling point, like between the characters. The players are cool with each other, but the two characters really got into it, and it felt really, really organic and interesting. And I know that wasn't really the system, but this was a group that did tend to, at the time, kind of go more in the gonzo and silly sort of TCC play. So the fact that it still didn't stop that from happening, because I do think you can run a game and the system mechanics and the tone of those mechanics can change how the players are going to react the entire time. So even though it might not work better than some games that are more going for that serious tone, I do think it is possible. And if you do want to have a more serious tone in your game and you're worried that DCC won't allow you to do that, I do think that's more of a table thing than a system thing, because you can absolutely do it. And I'll use Goodman Games' most famous adventure as an example, Sailors on the Starless Sea. Sailors on the Starless Sea, you can run as the usual sort of funnel tone of weirdly morbid, mostly humorous, and kind of just fucking around, you know, very beer and pretzels. But the actual, like, scenario itself, and you actually just look at the scenario itself, it's basically a Warhammer Fantasy adventure, and you can play it more dark and humorous the way, you know, DCC tends to be, but you can also really sell home from the beginning to the players, like, hey, if your villagers don't succeed in this crazy suicide mission, that spells the end of your village. And you can really sell that tone. Now, I'm not saying you have to, I'm just saying that it's possible. You know, Sailors has a good sort of scary start, and then things start to get more crazy as it goes along. But overall, I think you can sell it really scary, or you can sell it really humorous. It's your job as the game master to set the tone and expectations, and it's the player's job to uphold that. If they agree to the tone that you want to do, and then you guys have talked about in session 0, or, you know, before the game, then you guys all are working together to make sure that tone works. Your descriptions and reactions can make the magic, for example, come off, you know, cartoonish and silly and over the top. I remember running a game a while back where the players basically bypassed half the dungeon by turning the fighter into a giant 90-foot colossus, and he just picked up the party and just walked across, because it's sort of like an open concept dungeon, I guess. But it was an open dungeon. It was outside, is what I'm trying to say. So basically the fighter picked them all up and just sort of bypassed half the dungeon, and then just started beating the crap out of the orc leader and all his little minions. And the whole thing was fun. We were all laughing because it was like all the challenge was gone, as they had just basically completely dominated the final encounter. But it came off, you know, really fun and silly. But you can also sell the magic as like dark and eldritch and really unknowable and scary and corrupting. And that, you know, that's how it is really in the base book. And you can play it really silly, but I think if you really, really want to sell, like, no, every time you use this, like, here are ways that we're going to make sure this stays very creepy or weird. Every description from the GM can be a lot more on the dark side than the funny side, even if the spell is kind of silly with something like cantrip or, you know, something like that. But I think that's enough preamble. I think we can get into the actual running of a DCC campaign. I'll be honest, I'm approaching this as somebody talking to somebody who has already run RPG campaigns. Sort of, I'm assuming you're from the OSR or from 5e, from Pathfinder. Now, if you are new and you haven't run anything and you're just looking at DCC, this won't be like gibberish to you or it'll be too advanced. I'm more just gonna not sort of focus too much on broader details like that you might already know. For example, like, I'm not gonna explain to you deeply what a hex crawl is. I'm gonna bring up hex crawls later on, but I'm not gonna go into the nitty-gritty of that, because the way you run a hex crawl in DCC is not that different than how you run for OSE or Swords and Wizardry or 5e even. Like, it's all gonna run fairly similarly at a core way. But anyway, let's start with the most common way of starting a campaign, the funnel start. So the funnel start is by far the most common way to start off a campaign, is just the way a lot of people do it. I think it's a really cool way because you get to see your character come from nothing to actually becoming an adventurer. You basically make their backstory with them as you go through, so it's always really awesome, and players are going to get really attached to those characters, so it's a great start for a campaign. And there's two ways to do a funnel. Either you write your own, or you grab one of the pre-made adventures. We'll look at published adventures first. The first thing you want to do is pick out one you like, and I'm going to say the best one to start off with really is the one in the core book, Portal and the Stars. I think I've said it now probably like in 6 videos, but that is the one I would start with because firstly, it comes with a book, so no extra money, which is already a win, but it's also short and solid. So if it's not a huge commitment, I mean, you can play that one in 2 hours or 3 hours, honestly. Maybe longer depending on your group or how you run things, but overall, you can run it in a very quick amount of time, and there's not a lot of prep you need at all for it. You'll see a lot of people recommend Sailors, and I don't think it's a bad choice. I think it's the first one I ran. I think I ran it before I ran Portal, but Sailors is just really long if you're not used to it. I've been able to get down to a science of running it within like 3 to 4 hours at this point. But I remember the first time I ran it took me like 6 hours. Like it's a lot if you're not used to it or you need some more experience with DCC. I would go Portal over Sailors as my sort of usual verdict, because I see that question all the time on r/DCC, which is, what funnel do I start with? And I'm just going to say Portal now to save you the time. For a published adventure, it'll tell you how many level 0s you need per person, but for a regular sized group, it'll usually be about 3 to 4 level 0s per person. If you have a huge group, which I do not recommend from experience. I've run a game for 8 people and it was kind of not great. Or if you have a tiny group, you might need to vary how much you give out. In general, though, it's just going to be your mileage varies. If you only have like 2 people and it says like you need 16 level 0s, maybe only give them 5, then have the others as backups that you just give them as the other ones die. But that's what I would probably do for a group that small running a funnel. It'll just change. You'll have to just roll the punches when you're dealing with weird sizes like that. Next, one of the big concerns I see with running funnels is actually running all those level 0s together. I see a lot of people nervous about that because they're so used to running, just the one character per person, and that is completely normal to feel that way. It is a little overwhelming. Even with the small character sheets, you do have just a lot to deal with. And there's a lot of different ways you can play it. A lot of it comes down to just running it yourself and seeing how you like it. But every player will have their own preference. A lot of players will have sort of their main character, usually the one with the really good stats, or the one they just find the funniest, one who might have a duck or has like a weird background, or whatever it might be. A lot of players have that, where they have that one sort of main hero kind of level 0, and then they have a bunch of other mooks with them that you just sort of send off to die. Others roleplay all 4 of them, or however many they have equally, and then try and just see where they go. Just let players do what they want with that. I think that's the funnest way to do it. But one thing I see people do that I do advise against, and one caveat for this video and every video I do, if it works for you, just keep doing it. I'm not saying you're doing it wrong. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that I've noticed this, and this is a big issue that you're probably going to run into, but I've seen some people have a thing where they have the people play one level 0 at a time, and when that level 0 dies, they throw in the other one. And the problem with that is that you are playing a turn-based game, and in a turn-based game, action economy is king. And with that action economy, the power of the mob is extremely powerful. When you have all 16 on the field actually using their turns and not just 4, it is a completely different game. That power of the mob is extremely important, both for the creativity of the players using the different ones they have, as well as just those extra hits they get per turn. A group of level 0s can absolutely beat the fuck out of some dark horrors like they're in a Smiling Friends bit. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can run it. I would say just find out what the players like. If the players feel overwhelmed, if a player really just wants to have the one there, then let them do that. It's really up to you and your group and what you guys are cool with, what you find out. A lot of this will come after the first time you're on a funnel. You'll learn what you like and don't like. Outside of that, I don't see many questions about running the funnel itself, because outside of you just running a bunch of weak dorks instead of competent heroes, the game runs pretty much like any other dungeon. There really isn't that much different when it comes to a funnel versus, just a level 1 dungeon or just a different OSR dungeon, Now, for running your own funnel, I only have a few things to say. For one thing, I think it's best if you try and keep it to a one-shot. Stretching it out past that is doable, but I do think keeping the momentum going in just one session just feels a lot better when it comes to the players going through that gauntlet as a nothing and then coming out an adventurer. I really do think having that one shot to do that makes it a lot more interesting and dramatic than stretching out too far. Now, you can do it with long funnels where you still have them level up, halfway through a funnel or that sort of thing, but I still think that has that level of unsatisfactory feeling of like, yeah, we got pretty far and we did pretty well, but we didn't get like to the end as level zeros and then became adventurers. No, we got through to a point where it's like, yeah, it feels like you have enough experience now that you guys will be leveled up. Plus, I need you guys to level up so you can actually handle the second part of the funnel in the next session. Your mileage may vary. I have done both. I have run funnels that have taken longer than a one shot. I've just never really enjoyed that much. It's not bad. It's just, just a little extra thing of, saving the day and one shot and all that sort of thing as level zeros is just really satisfying. I think both for the players and the GM. And then if it's part of a campaign, once you've done that, you can go straight into the greater world. I think it's like almost like a cool like tutorial level or session. This advice applies to both published adventures as well as stuff that you write. But I think the reason why I'm bringing it up now is that if you write your own adventures and you haven't had any experience before that, there's a good chance you might realize that it's really swingy at lower levels. I mean, DCC is swingy throughout the entire game. If anything, it's crazier. But I guess what I mean by swingier lower levels is that you can have players just fumble after fumble after fumble. I've seen it happen where I've had loads of fumbles and then the monsters get loads of crits and they start slaughtering through the players. Or it's the opposite where, and also this is usually what happens, I can't get a single hit in. No matter what I do, I have, 4 beastmen and not a single one can hit at all, and they just keep getting slaughtered. And that's things that I've run loads of these funnels where one session, there's 4 people left by the end of it, and the next session, there's 12. So that's one thing you have to keep in mind is that it's very swingy with what can happen just because the dice rolls are so rough, because a lot of things they're going to come across can die in one hit, and the players can die in one hit. So as you write it, you might have encounters in mind, and they might not be enough, they might be too much, and you just gotta figure that out like any other sort of scenario. Maybe you should, beef up some of the HP, or throw in an extra encounter in this room that you're going to have just be like a normal hallway or whatever it might be, and then you just sort of see where things are as they go along. I think the most satisfying ending is when players have either, like 1 or 2 level zeros left, but you can't always get that. And honestly, I find these days, especially with really creative players, once you know what they're doing, the last few funnels I've run in a row, I think I've had lots of people with 3 guys left over. It can be really hard to tell when you have 16 level zeros how effective an encounter will be. On the opposite end, as for restocking level zeros, if they get really low because you've been way too brutal, or the dice have been super mean and they've gotten loads of criticals hit against them, that sort of stuff, there's lots of different ways to restock level zeros. It is part of the game design of a funnel that if they do get too low, about at the halfway point or like at like the 75% point, that they get, some fresh guys, and there's so many ways to do it. You can have prisoners in the dungeon be a thing, you can have somebody fall through a portal, you can have like stasis chambers, maybe like alien egg sacs that they're being held in, you can have people from the village that's behind them, coming up to reinforce them. There are so many different ways you can restock them, and I wouldn't worry too much about the details. Like, don't get stuck too much on how much sense it makes. If it tangentially makes sense, then it makes sense, it works, it's all good. Just give them level zeros and just keep the game moving. Probably the most asked question I see when it comes to funnels is actually what to do after the funnel is over. This is the question I see the most in Discords and on Reddit, or asked to me is like, after I finish this, what should I do? What adventure should I play? And that's just a difficult question because I don't know you. I don't know what you want. Do you want a more horror themed campaign? Do you want a sandbox campaign? Do you want some scenarios that are just classic swords and sorcery ones? There's a lot of different things you can do. Are you running a player driven campaign? There's a lot of stuff there that really just comes down to what do you want out of this campaign. Firstly, and probably the most obvious one, is just running a level 1 DCC adventure. And I'll probably just link my RPG review playlist, and you can just go through that and see all the different ones I've reviewed there. And in terms of variety for these level 1 scenarios, you have so much choice. You have urban adventures, you have gonzo adventures, you have really pulpy sword and sorcery, you have horror, you have all kinds of different adventures that you can choose from. So it really just comes down to seeing, which ones look cool to you and running them. I would say most scenarios that Goodman Games has published for DCC have been good. I have a few on my shelf that I've looked at and been like, this actually looks kind of tough. This one looks like it might be a little too much for what I want to run, but overall most of them have been great to run, and a lot of them are really well designed for new people coming into the hobby. If you know the tone of your campaign and what kind of games you want to run, it'll be much easier to recommend stuff to you. But here's a short list of my recommendations, and I have a review for each one of these. So the first one we have here is for a good hack and slash pulpy adventure. Shadow of the Beakman was some of the most fun I've had in a DCC adventure recently. For a campaign with more horror elements, Shadow Under Devil's Reef or Conspiracy of Ravens are both solid options. For more urban sword and sorcery adventuring, I recommend Masks of Lightmar. That's from the DCC Lightmar line. Really good adventure. And of course, for some gonzo DCC craziness, I highly recommend Intrigue at the Core of Chaos. That is a fantastic one. However, maybe the funnel was the only linear part you wanted, and then you want, the rest of the game to sort of open up to a hex crawl or point crawl, or just generally a big sandbox adventure. And that is a fantastic way to run DCC. And you can also do a plot-driven one. Like, if you're just opening it up to whatever you want to do, DCC will handle it just the way I think most fantasy RPGs will handle any sort of playstyle like that. A lot of the funnels tend to have little breadcrumbs for sort of future adventures. For example, Portal Under the Stars has part of its treasure at the end, does have a bit of a weird vision thing that can lead you into another adventure. The other thing too is if you're doing more of a sandbox campaign or just a bigger campaign, you can also really have player-driven games, which are super, super fun, where, you know, a player might be like, oh, hey, my wizard who just became a wizard actually doesn't have a great intelligence score because he was the only one who survived, and that was somehow his best stat. You could have them go on a quest for forbidden knowledge where, you know, they find some dark tome that gives them a corruption, but also gives them, you know, like maybe a +1 to their intelligence or a +2, whatever it might be. Maybe it's a sword the warrior wants to go and find. Maybe they want to just get rich and they want to go off and do things. They're going to look for a dungeon. I'll cover this stuff a little bit more in depth later in the video when we cover the level part as well as the different playstyles part. But basically, I'm going to be repeating myself a lot where I just sort of say, figure out what you want to do and just do it. You don't need reassurance from people online telling you that it works. You know it works. It's a fantasy RPG. Anything you can run in 5e, you can probably run with DCC. I mean, sure, there'll be differences because, you know, DCC actually has adventures that end, unlike 5e, but outside of that, you should be good. But before we move on to the next section, here's just a few funnels I'm going to list off that I recommend. For horror, we have Creep Scrag Creep, which is a fantastic funnel, and its influence will become very apparent very quickly if you read it. I think by the first paragraph, you'll have a good idea of what's aping off of. For a much sillier tone, I recommend Sanctum of the Snail. It's a pretty long one, but very fun and gonzo. That one, when I ran it, I did have to shorten out parts or just sort of cut off parts of the dungeon because it is so huge, but I highly recommend that one. That one I ran years ago. I should run it again, honestly, because there's a lot of fun stuff in that. It's pretty silly. If you're somebody who has kids and you're trying to get them into DCC, I think this is a great one to do it with. And for a less silly but still gonzo funnel, Hole in the Sky is a really fun and a great way to kick off a sort of out there campaign. It's what I used to kick off the Pile of Shame campaign, and that one was pretty out there, especially by the end of that campaign. And there's loads of other great funnels out there. I would just say find ones that look cool to you. If they got a cool cover, you know, really sick artwork, whatever it might be, just grab it and just start running it. Anyway, let's move on to the next section. Level DCC is by far my favorite way to play DCC. Firstly, for the more rules-like crowd, leveled play is fantastic for your tastes. You basically get everything you'll ever get at level 1, and then you just get better at it. Sure, you'll get more spells, and probably, hopefully, you'll get magic items that might add new mechanics and that sort of thing. But overall, you'll know how to play. Once you get into level 1, you'll learn the rules, and then from there, you basically know the game. If you're somebody who wants builds and sort of like the deep mechanics with every sort of new level and all these choices, I'm gonna be honest, DCC just isn't what you're looking for. Now, if you've looked at the book, you probably already know that, but I just want to make that clear where, not to say you shouldn't play it, but if that is something you are looking for, or you have a group of people who really want that, this just isn't going to provide that. I do think, however, that the 5e and Pathfinder crowd, the ones who usually love all that build stuff, and, you know, every other game out there that loves builds, I do think that crowd is sleeping on Shadow of the Demon Lord. That game is so good. The builds are amazing. It's super, super fun. I'm gonna do a video on it at some point. If you want good builds, but you still want those narrative elements, Shadow of the Demon Lord is where it's at. But if you want less to worry about and you're willing to give yourself over to chaos and random chance, DCC is for you. Though honestly, I don't think the chaos and randomness of it is actually as brutal as a lot of people make it out to be. I think a lot of people make a much bigger deal of it than it actually is. And one thing too about the randomness is that it's meant to be combated by player risk-taking and creativity. I had one guy online come in pretty hot saying that basically he played DCC once and the entire session the wizard couldn't get a single spell off, and that he mentioned that, well, at least 5e doesn't punish players, which was just a weird take. I mean, I'm also somebody who doesn't really attack 5e. Like, I make the jokes and everything else, but overall I think 5e does a good job of what it's trying to do perfectly. But to say that DCC magic punishes players is a hilariously bad take. I've heard loads of people sort of say this where they played one session of DCC, seen a bunch of failure, and then go, the game is just bad, where you can't get anything done, anything like that. You are meant to spell burn and burn luck as a wizard. If you play DCC the way you play Skyrim, where you hold on to all your potions until the end of the game and then you just have all these potions with you, yeah, you're probably gonna have a bad time and you're gonna die. The game isn't designed for you to sort of just min-max and coast through everything by not using a single thing. It's meant for you to go, if you want something, you better go and blast off. And so I've heard a lot of people say this sort of thing, and my wonder is, like, did they spell burn? Did they burn luck? Did they at any point try and use any creativity with the GM to be like, hey, I'm going to try and do this thing. Can I try and get a bonus with that? Like, usually when players are that engaged with me, I tend to try and give them a level of leeway or try and help them out what I can with a bonus or, give them some sort of knowledge or anything like that where I'm like, okay, you're engaged and you're trying things. I brought up in my Shadow Beakman review, but I recently ran that, and in that game, I had the wizard and the elf, both level 1s, spell burn a bunch. The elf created this giant demon toad avatar by burning a shitload of points between luck and their physical stats to create this giant demon toad. And then the wizard cast enlarge on the demon toad avatar, making it into this gigantic kaiju. Like, at level 1, these two characters, already the demon toad by itself was already ridiculous, but with the enlarge, it just became a thing where it's like, okay, they couldn't beat you before, and they definitely can't beat you now. And so it is just one of those things where if you do spend those things, you will be rewarded for it. Maybe. There's still the fact that sometimes things can go wrong. So at level 1, you can do that. On top of that, you basically have your spells forever until you fail them, which you can still burn luck to try and save if that happens if you have enough luck and it's not too bad. Like, it's not punishing. It is pretty hard, and it does want you to, to risk things because it's dark magic, it's chaotic, it's unknowable, but it's not punishing. But to play devil's advocate just for a second, I do have a friend who isn't a fan of DCC Magic because he finds it gives him anxiety because he does not know what it will do. He can't rely on it. He's a 5e player, so he's more used to just being able to have, basically a tool where you spend a resource point and your RGB lights come on and you get the thing you want for that resource cost. Sometimes you might, not get what you want fully with if enemies save on your fireball or whatever else. But in general, if you do the thing you're doing, you know what you're getting in 5e. And that is a take I respect. If you don't like it, that's completely fine. The 5e way of doing magic is the more normal way that almost all magic works. Even if stuff is different, in general, most games have a thing where it's like resource cost, you get a thing that you get. DCC Magic wants to feel like magic. And that's what makes it so cool. Also makes it so powerful and scary. So I totally get not liking it, but calling it punishing is just incorrect. If you want punishing, just go play Mothership when it releases in 2034. Anyway, with that rant over, let's get into actually being able to run level play instead of me ranting more and more about how people have really bad takes online. So when it comes to starting off a campaign at level 1 or 2, it really isn't that different than any other fantasy RPG. I've been saying a lot, but that is just basically going to be the theme of this entire video. But it's fairly similar to anything else. You're adventurers, you have backstories, and you're off to adventure. I do lean towards DCC Lightmar as my recommendations for people getting into a campaign with DCC because they don't have funnels, they have a thing called meets. And meets are, well, they're an adventure where the players meet. It's attempting to capture that feeling of Fafnir Grey Mouser or other pulpy sword and sorcery heroes sort of meeting up and becoming unlikely allies in weird situations. Whether that's them both being captured or just both trying to knock off the same store or whatever it might be, where they're just like, oh, this is a weird situation, but we kind of need each other to survive. And I find a lot of the meets that DCC Lightmar has really captures that, and it's a really, really fun way to kick off a campaign. Now, I do believe most of these take place in the city. I think maybe all of them do, but I'm not going to say that for sure just in case I'm wrong. But just because they start in a city does not mean you can't have them then leave the city if you're hoping for a more wilderness campaign or just a less urban campaign. The ending of that meet could be them getting run out of town by the guards or the police or a dark sorcerer or whoever it might be, if you do want them outside the city and, not doing an urban adventure, if that's what you're going for. Slight spoilers for the opening to Masks of Lightmar, so just go to this time code if you don't want to get spoiled for that. I'm basically just going to talk about the first, 5 minutes of that scenario. It's not going to be huge spoilers, it's stuff you'd find out right away anyway, but just in case if you don't want anything, I want to make sure that people can, go into that completely blind if they still want to play that game. Masks of Lightmar is such a great meet because the premise is that the players are all robbing the safe in a wealthy manner on the same night. During this night, there's a big party going on, and so they're all going in at the same time to try and grab whatever is in there. And when they're all in the basement about to get to the safe, they all bump into each other, and then they're attacked by guards soon after, and they have to sort of fight for their life. And it's a really, really great start because it's a fantastic way for the players to sort of decide who their characters are in a very organic way, just by describing certain things, like how did they get in there? So for example, maybe the warrior bent some bars to get in, maybe the thief disguised as a noble to get in there, all these different things you could do to sort of show what is your character and how do they operate. And then with the combat itself, how do they act? Do they try and protect one of the others who they sort of see as a fellow thief? Do they see them as a competitor where they're going to try and get them hurt? Do they just work and fight for their life in that moment and then talk after? Regardless of how it goes, they can really decide then and there how their player acts in the moment in an organic way that really sort of breaks the ice. So I think that is a fantastic way to kick off a campaign where you have this really exciting sort of, no, I don't want to say Ocean's 11 because it's a little bit different than that, but enough of an exciting pulp adventure, you know, really start off your campaign with a bang and then seeing where it goes from there. And a lot of the other meets they have for DCC Lightmar are of a similar kind of ilk where you do have a lot of those fun starts and seeing where things go. So those are some great ones to look at if you still want to stay sort of like in the DCC sphere when you're going to try and kick off your campaign and you're trying to just look for a cool scenario to do that with. But those aren't your only choices. Goodman Games has now been doing these for a while now. I think at least with this iteration of Dungeon Crawl Classics, I think we have like almost a decade, if no, we definitely have over a decade now, yeah, of adventures being made for it. So you have a huge catalog of first-party adventures, and you also have a shitload of third-party adventures that have been made, and there's always more coming out. Like I said earlier with the different funnels and all that sort of stuff, just look for ones that look cool to you, that you think would be a great way to start off your campaign. If they work for the tone and the setting and whatever else you're doing, you have so much choice to choose from. I'll cover different campaign styles and everything, like I said, later in the video. Right now, I kind of want to cover the main thing I see when it comes to leveled play. I touched on it a bit earlier, but I want to go more in depth on it now, and that's the classes. And the classes do really make people a little bit nervous about running DCC, and I totally get it. And I'm going to hopefully be able to help you through with any of your issues you might have here, because they really aren't as big of a deal as you might think they are. But we're just going to go through some of these more problematic classes that you might be worried about ruining your campaign, or just, you know, whatever issues you might have with them. I think I'll be able to hopefully, you know, make you feel a little bit better about running it. So let's get into the most contentious classes and how they might destroy your campaign. First up, I'm going to say, honestly, the warrior and the dwarf, I don't really need to go over. I don't see their mighty deed breaking any games. Personally, for me, the warrior and mighty deed and all that sort of stuff is completely balanced. They just have basically like a badass die. So they can do some fun stuff, but if you can't handle that, then like everything else in the game is going to be hard for you to handle if that's the case, you know? Because that is probably the most tame class compared to the ones we're going to talk about. The next one I'm going to talk about are clerics, who I'm also going to skip over a bit because, firstly, if you know me, I don't really use clerics, so I'm not the best person to talk about them, but I will say they are very easy to deal with. In my experience, all I've ever had to deal with really is the fact that like they do have that whole deity thing. The disapproval die does keep them in check. The arbitrary nature of the gods does really help. I do think a lot of players understand when they're taking cleric, there's a bit more of a formality to it, that there's a bit more of this, you know, oath they're upholding. So the nice thing about that is that that can keep players in check narratively, so they don't do certain things that you might not want them to do, or you can sort of nudge them a certain way with their religion and their gods and all that sort of stuff. So they're a little bit more easy to handle. What I see the most is that this complaint that elves and wizards are going to make all combat encounters trivial or really ruin, you know, the big bad evil guy. And I'm not going to say that's not a possibility when it comes to certain things, you know, really high rolls and just the general fact that they, you know, have unlimited spells until they lose them. That is a possibility that might happen. I would say with that, I would look at it more in a positive way, where you have some amazing moments where if your players just absolutely obliterate something. Now, if that is happening a lot, there does become the problem where it's like, am I challenging them enough? Are they engaged anymore? Do they feel like they can just get away with anything because they have this wizard with them who will just, you know, pop off at any moment and just destroy everything around them? And that's fair, but the thing is that in a campaign game, they can't pop off that many times. You can sort of get a character who's a wizard who will stick around for a while if they play moderately, you know, burn some spell burn here and there, burn some luck, and are pretty overall judicious with that ability, and they're going to stick around a lot of time. Or you get a wizard or elf that gets to pop off, you know, a couple times, and then they're done because they don't survive exiting that dungeon, or they die from the encounter itself after they pop off and there's still one thing left, or whatever it might be. There's a number of reasons where they might get those cool moments, but that might be the end of that character. On that longer timeline, they really aren't endurance runners, they're sprinters. And so there's a lot they need to be wary of, and things you can do to sort of change that. Throwing in extra encounters if, you know, when they're trying to escape, or, you know, making a certain encounter beefier. There's a lot of different stuff you can do with that, where a lot of my advice is going to come down to, okay, if this thing happens, you're just going to need to have a knee-jerk reaction in the moment of, are you going to add more to this? Are you going to, you know, have them be immune to fire or whatever it might be that the wizard's done to try and make things a little bit harder? There's a lot of stuff you can do that I can't really tell you every different thing that could happen because I can't account for that. All I can really say is on a general level that you just need to get used to having to deal with that. If you want to do this, if you do want to run DCC, you just need to get used to the fact that you are going to need to be quick on your feet, and you're just going to deal that stuff, sort of, be on the back foot and come back with certain things, whether it's extra monsters, extra traps, whether it's an extra complication. Because one thing too is that a lot of times I find players sometimes forget details. So you can have stuff where, like, if you're in a city, or if there's a caveat where it's like, oh, hey, by the way, I need you to capture this wizard. Don't kill them. I need you to capture them. The one that's, in a dungeon. Yeah, if you, summon the Earth's core and all the magma there within and hit the entire dungeon, that's not going to end well for you. So please don't do that. That's what you can do, that sort of stuff. If they're in a city, like I mentioned, then there's rules and laws. Like, you can't just pop off in a city without, consequences. So there are in-game narrative things you can do to keep that stuff in check if you want to. So one thing that I would do is that I thought this was the actual rule in the book, but it's not. And that is, if a wizard or elf fumbles, don't let them get out of the fumble. In the book, they can do that. They can burn luck to get out of it. I would say don't let them do that. Firstly, it's more fun. If they're going to be messing with these crazy things where they can sort of just shoot off a nuke at any moment, I do think making sure that, like, oh no, if you roll a 1, like, you're getting that 1. Because there's still also a luck check where they can get out of a lot of the bad stuff. Oftentimes when I've had people roll a fumble, they've rolled really well on the luck check and then got nothing because of it. They just got misfire, or, like I said, nothing at all. So having more chances for corruption makes it more fun. It adds that feeling of that crazy magic that they're using and keeps them in check a bit, where it's like, hey, if you know you're going to fumble, you can't get out of it. That might make them rethink, casting every 2 seconds. If that's something you want to do, the players are there to play and they are there to have fun. Like, just let them do it. Like, you have the whole world under your command. You can throw in more things to make things more challenging. I think it's always better to try and make things more challenging from the outside versus trying to stop your players too much from doing stuff. But outside of that, even wizards with, like, a high stamina don't have a lot of hit points. Like, even at higher levels, like, it is still brutally low. And elves aren't much better. It's not hard to body them. If you have things target them, or, like smart creatures, or just creatures that see them, fire off fireballs or whatever it might be, they might just go for the wizard. Like, sure, the wizard can just, cast Color Spray and blind and daze everything within, like, a mile radius. But let's hope they go first the initiative score, because they only have 9 hit points and a 13 AC, and that ain't gonna fucking help very much. Also, another thing you can use to keep them in check, this is a rule I don't really use, mostly out of laziness, because I don't like to stop the game when we're making characters to just put one in each one. But Mercurial Magic, which is a really, really cool little sort of thing for each spell, but giving a Mercurial effect to every spell they have, like you're supposed to, by the book, can make them think twice about casting certain ones. Firstly, some of them have parameters, so they need to fulfill those parameters to actually cast a spell. Some of them have really bad consequences, like, a person dying every time they cast a spell, sort of bad. So there are things like that too, that you can add those mercurial effects to the spells as well, if you want to give them an extra thing they might need to think about instead of just blasting off every time. But honestly, it just really isn't that big of a deal. You can have these spellcasters that are just going to have a really good time just blasting off spells here and there, because that's what they want to do. DCC just has the idea of, like, hey, here's some casters that can actually do stuff at low levels. Here's some actual fun, crazy magical abilities like you read in books and stories or see on movies and that sort of thing. Because one thing that kind of sucks about casters and level their games is that early on, they have to get hamstrung to be, not too far gone compared to the other players at the table playing whatever they're doing. So you get like these piddly low levels of, I got 1 spell, or I get, 2 slots, and the spells aren't even that good. And so this is trying to correct that and make it much stronger and better and make you feel really fucking cool at really low levels, while still making you extremely easy to kill, either by your own hands or from the outside world where they just smack you once across the face and your, like, 2 hit points don't save you from that. So just to put a bow on the elf and the wizard, they're glass cannons at the end of the day. And lots of games have different tactics on how to deal with glass cannons. If things do get out of hand with them, take those moments and learn from them and see what you can do in the next one to do better. Because, yeah, sure, honestly, there's been a few times where I've had wizards and I went, shit. As much as I love these things, I actually had, like, a whole thing planned here that I was really excited to do. This is still pretty cool, but now I had to sort of scramble because we have another hour left of our session, and the wizard just totally and completely destroyed this thing. So either we're going to end super early, or I'm going to come up with some new stuff. And that is going to happen, but I do think that's just a way you can learn. So if that does happen where you feel like the wizard did ruin your game because they killed your BBEG or whatever it is where things got out of hand and out of control way faster than you expected or wanted, I would say just look at what happened in that moment to make you feel that way, what got you guys there, how you could do it better next time, because, you know, maybe next time you can have maybe more dudes where it might hit the main guy and kill off all other dudes, but you can have other guys come out from like a back room, or, you know, have some regeneration abilities, or give them immunity to some powers. You can have a lot of stuff like that where you might just need to first get punched to realize how you can fight back against it next time. And that's the biggest advice I can really give when it comes to the wizard and the elf. I would say enjoy watching your players cackle maniacally as they destroy the world around them. And don't forget that if they do that in a campaign, because it's not a one-shot, what's beautiful is that there's always consequences to your actions like that. Whether it's a patron who's going like, whoa, okay, this is a giant new power that just appeared in the region. Either I'm going to try and get you under my wing and then have you do jobs for me because I need that sort of thing, or I'm going to send people after you, or whatever it might be where somebody else is like, dude, you like destroyed like the entire real estate of this area. Half the village is now on fire because of you. There's a lot of ways you can handle this. It's not just they blow up everything and then it's like, all right, we'll move on from this. Now, let's talk about the actual broken class, the Thief. The Thief is like a ridiculous class that I find it very funny that most people focus on the Wizard and the Elf, because the Thief can just get by so much stuff. Now, low levels, they're not that great necessarily because they might have shitty stats, which makes their skills worse, and they don't have that much luck. But at higher levels, thieves become like demigods of luck. They are insane. It is very hard for them to fail at anything later on. So for the Wizard and the Elf, Spellburn comes back at 1 point per day after 24 hours of not using Spellburn. That's very slow. For Thieves, they get their level back in luck per day. So a level 4 Thief is getting 4 luck back per day. And also, every time they burn 1 point of luck, they roll a d6. At level 4, like that's not even like, that's like mid-tier. That's not even high level yet. And you're already just basically being able to breeze through anything with some gambles. It's pretty insane. And on top of that, they are murder machines because they also get their backstab, which when they get that off, they get an automatic critical. And chances are they're probably gonna get that a lot because you should let them get a lot. If they're sneaking around, or if, you know, enemies are distracted by the warrior fighting them so they can get around the back and then go for a stab, you should be giving the Thieves lots of opportunities to do that because that's what they're playing for and it's fun. But with that, you know, the backstab has a skill bonus, so they have a really good to hit chance. And then there's a good chance they might just completely murder that dude. Just straight up. I've seen it happen a bunch of times where the Thief will just cut through dudes. They'll get like a critical where they just backstab one guy, murder him, and then part of that critical will be them getting another attack against another dude. So they'll just fucking murder 2 guys in one go. It's great. I guess it's pretty fitting that most of the discourse is around wizards and elves, all the flashy casters, and not the sneaky little murder machine. The halfling is similar to the Thief. I don't use halflings that much in my games, but whenever I've had them, I've never found them to be that much of an issue because they only get, 2 luck for every luck point burned. They do get their level back in luck, so they are still pretty good with the whole luck thing, and they can give their luck to others. And I have heard other people mention that they found them broken, but in my experience, I do think the Thief is better than the halfling. Comment below if you can explain why the halfling is better than the Thief. But overall, mechanically, I think the Thief is much better in my opinion. Now, I will say the halfling does get really good dual wielding, which is awesome because they crit on getting a 16 on either of the dice they roll, but only fumble if they roll a 1 on both d16 dice they're rolling for dual wielding. So they're pretty good in that sense, but that's more on the level of a fighter more on the level of a warrior than it is really on the level of a thief. So I don't find them to be that bad. But anyway, how do you actually deal with a thief who's so, consistently powerful and really good at checks and can just sort of murder things and get by a bunch of stuff? If you already noticed from how I talk about stuff, I don't consider this unbalanced to be a bad thing. I think it's really fun that you can be a thief, just the same way you can be a wizard who just blasts off. You can be a thief who's actually really good at what you do. I think it's great that you can actually have characters that are really good even early on at the things they want to be good at. But me mentioning how much I don't care about this stuff isn't really conducive to helping you actually understand how you can deal with them. So I have a few different ways that you can handle them. But this is also directed more at mid and higher tier thieves, because level 1 thieves, like I mentioned, are okay, like they are good, but they aren't on the same level as they are later on. So just one thing to keep in mind, just like the wizard and elves, they don't have that many hit points. Even with a d6 and whatever their stamina is, it just isn't that much, especially with how crazy some of the monsters are that you're going to be dealing with in this game. So you can easily still deal with them that way. The other thing too is that a lot of their great skills they have are based on them rolling for stuff. It's them actually doing those skills, doing those backstabs, checking traps and all that sort of stuff. Like a lot of their power comes from what they can do, they don't really have that much defense when it comes to, attacks and other things. Now, they can roll a lot of luck for saves and that sort of thing, which is great for them, but that is another way that if you do have a lot of attack saves, like breath weapons or, traps or whatever else, that is a way to sort of, add on to the little bit of that tax of like, oh, do you want to burn any luck for this? Because you failed that check. Do you want to burn a few points of luck here and there? So there are things like that you can do where over the course of an adventuring day or the entire adventure where you're going to try and whittle down their luck just a little bit so that the final encounter is, pretty tough for them, where they can't just get out of everything with really good luck burns. And I know some people will say targeting a player won't feel good. I do agree with you if it feels arbitrary, or if it feels really mean-spirited, or if it feels totally out of whack with what the NPCs should be doing. But I do think there's a lot of times where you can really flip that in a good way, or in a way that makes sense. A lot of players are totally fine with that sort of thing. They're not going to get mad at you if they're good players, because on a meta level, a lot of them know you need to create a good challenge. But also, it just makes sense to go for the thief a lot depending on what's happening. Like, if your group is fighting a group of mercenaries, and then out of nowhere, the thief comes from the darkness and just stabs a dude from the brains to his balls, and that guy just bleeds out and dies immediately from the backstab attack, it makes sense that most of them would probably turn on this new threat that just came out of nowhere. Those sort of incidents are a great way to sort of have the target on that guy. Sure, he did a crazy thing where he just murdered, the captain of the mercenaries, but now he has 4 dudes of swords all surrounding him who are all going for him. And one thing too is that you can target them and make them feel good about it. Because if you're on a long enough campaign, you can have them, come across a group of adventurers or like bounty hunters or, some people who have an issue with them who are hired by an enemy of the party. And you can have them actively say out loud, go for the thief. We heard about him. We know what he can do. Go for him. And like the thief might feel really cool and badass. Like, oh shit, they heard about me? They heard about all the horrible things I've done to other people? That's great. And then, they might get murdered, but also they might even feel more badass if they also just beat the ever-living shit out of the people who came to attack them. That is a great way to make players feel great. I have done that in the past, and oftentimes I find that players really enjoy that because it feels like the world's reacting to them, and also reacting to them in a way that they actually really enjoy and like and feel like, oh, cool. Like, I'm actually making an impact. Like, people know my name because I'm a crazy murderer. This is great. That is another tactic to use if you do want to still target them, but not make them feel bad about it, or make them feel like you're out to get them or vindictive. And also what makes sense for your world and the story and everything else, you can have them come across monsters and people that, can see in the darkness, can hear the thief coming, can't be surprised, can't be backstabbed. The great thing about this sort of game where you're dealing with like dark sorcerers and really capable fighters and horrifying, disgusting monsters is that when everybody's unbalanced,
no one will be.
Another way you can make things a little bit more challenging for the thief is making them roll more. Now, this is one I'm a little bit iffy on because as I'm playing more, I'm getting more into the mindset of only make your players roll for things if there's actual consequences and, actual things at stake that are interesting. If they fail, there should be an interesting reason. Not like the craziest thing ever, but there should be something that happens, So I'm not saying so much as make them roll constantly and arbitrarily just to make them roll to try and make them lose luck. I mean more as in present opportunities where they can feel special, where they can use their abilities. They have abilities, make them use them. If they're breaking into a manor, maybe have a giant wall around it where they have to like climb sheer surfaces. Maybe have a lot more chests or they need to unlock or big doors and that sort of thing. Just make them use their abilities a lot more. Maybe have them use their disguise self more. It's like, oh yeah, you guys can get this party. You have a few different options. You can disguise yourself. You can try and climb up around, whatever you want to do. Just more create opportunities, not arbitrary rolling, but just to give them more reasons to roll in a satisfying way. Just to cap off this whole section, I think it really just comes down to the fact that a lot of people just go online and they see a lot of people complaining. They see a lot of white room theory crafting and they start to make, real mountains out of molehills, which I don't know why I sound so old when I say that, but yeah, they just try and make issues that aren't actually there. And I think a lot of it is just take a step back. A lot of people online are talking and not actually playing. The amount of people I've seen talk about stuff who haven't actually run a game or even been in a game, they've just been a part of the community but don't actually do anything with it. They just like the game and they haven't taken the leap to actually run a game or anything like that. A lot of those people are the ones who are complaining about things that don't work. People who actually play the game tend to find there aren't those issues because they're actually just playing the game. I think one of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to RPGs and when I see people talk about certain things is that this is not just a DCC thing, this is just any system. It's when I see people who haven't even played the game yet and they immediately go about all the things they're going to change when they finally get to that game they're going to run. But that game never comes and, they never make those changes because they never actually run that game. They're too busy in their own head figuring out all the things that might go wrong, how they might have their game ruined and all that sort of stuff. And that's a real shame. Like, you can just run the game. Things might go wrong. You might have people ruin your game. That might actually happen to you. Hopefully that isn't the case, and 9 times out of 10, most people who run stuff have a fantastic time, so it isn't an issue you need to worry about too much. Just get started. Don't mind the classes too much. You might have a big bad evil guy that you had this whole idea for, and you might just get them immediately wrecked by the wizard who just blasts them with fire, and then the thief comes out of nowhere and backstabs them and just finishes it in round 2. That might happen. But I guarantee if that's how it goes out, your players are probably going to have a fucking blast. So just enjoy it. Don't worry about it too much. Just get a game going and just start playing DCC. Before we get to the section on settings and different styles of play, I just want to quickly talk about higher level play with DCC. Honestly, the reason why this is going to be pretty quick is that there's just not that much more to say about it because, as I mentioned earlier, you basically have the same abilities, you're just better at it. So you have basically just these crazy characters. And with DCC and everything going on with that, you might already be going on crazy adventures. You know, if you have Intrigue of the Court of Chaos, or you already went off to the literal Court of Chaos level 1, or you might have been, you know, flying around the multiverse at level 2, or even at level 0. There's a lot of different stuff you could be doing really early on that higher level, not that much will change, except maybe just the numerical value of monsters and numbers and hit points and all that sort of stuff. Mostly what I keep in mind for is just what magic items I've gotten over time, because, you know, at level 7, a warrior might just have a shitload of stuff, like a giant magical sword, you know, big armor, whatever it might be, really crazy abilities. So you might want to keep track of what everybody has to an extent, just so you know what you're dealing with, so you can keep things, you know, interesting and crazy. But also, the scope of things should be so much bigger even then. Like, just to take a level 7 warrior, that is like a hero of legend. I can't remember what the exact numbers are. In the book, it says what the odds are of every level and how much people there are, where I think, like, it's like 1 million for, like, level 5 or something like that. Like, getting to that level, very few people ever make it there. So those are people who should be, you know, in charge of cities, or being called on by the gods, or are leading their own warband. Like, at those levels, you're not really so much adventuring to just go straight into dungeons and get loot. You should be doing much different things, much grander things, where you really have grabbed, you know, the attention from gods and crazy powerful people. So not that much different than lower level DCC, since that can already happen a lot in a lot of the adventures if you're running, you know, the actual adventures that Goodman Games publishes. So just overall, I don't really have much to say on that. And also, if you're looking at this video when you're about to run like a level 5 campaign, you have enough confidence to do that. I don't think you need any videos. I think you're going to be just fine. Well, with both the funnel and level play stuff out of the way, let's just briefly talk about campaign settings and a few different play styles. So at the time of this video, there are so many offshoots and settings made for DCC, I absolutely can't cover all of them. Even outside the scope of DCC, you have stuff like Starcrawl and Xcrawl. You have, you know, Mutant Crawl classics. Like, you have a lot of stuff that's based off of the same sort of framework that go off in completely different genres. It really shows you, if you have ideas of what you want to do with this and you're kind of worried about what you can do, like, there really is no limit to what you can do with these mechanics and the systems. And there's so much out there already for DCC and all its offshoots that if you have some crazy ideas, I guarantee there's at least something out there that you can grab for inspiration, or, you know, just mine for ideas, or take completely and just use that setting for your idea instead of your original setting you were going to do yourself. There's so much out there for DCC right now. Sci-fi, post-apocalypse, just weird gonzo shit. There's stuff for everybody. Though before we get into the settings, let's just talk about styles of play. I think the most popular way that people want to do DCC campaigns, or at least, you know, talk about it, whether they actually ever get around to doing it is another case entirely. But what a lot of people love doing is just running a sandbox DCC game where you make the sort of local area, or you make your big kingdom, or you use, you know, already a kingdom that's been made, you know, online or wherever you might have grabbed it. And then you just start putting down different adventures. You know, you put People the Pit over here, you put Shadow under Devil's Reef over here. You do that sort of thing where you kind of write your own stuff, you create and homebrew your own world, but then you just sort of populate it a little bit here and there with published adventures to sort of take off some of the mental load. So if the players decide, oh, we want to go check out what's in that dungeon, they'll basically just end up going to do People the Pit or whatever it might be. Or, you know, if they're staying in town, you might just have your own sort of 3-hour kind of improv adventure where they just chat with villagers and figure out weird local rumors and that sort of thing. So that's the style I kind of see most people talk about and want to do. It works perfectly. I would say if you are looking to do that and you're just looking for confirmation, I feel like just going on the subreddit or on any of the discords, like the official Goodman Games one or the Dungeon Crawlers Discord, loads of people have been running games like that. So if you want some experience from them, I would say just join those discords, those subreddits, those communities. So I would say just ask around and see what people have done, what they would do differently, what they recommend, you know, that sort of thing. And when it comes to sandbox, I mean, that covers, you know, hex crawls and point crawls and any other kind of crawl that is out there now. But I would say for those specifically, because I don't want to go too in depth on what a hex crawl is and what a point crawl is, I would say just look at the Alexandrian blog. I'm going to post the links to the ones that I think you should check out in the description, because the Alexandrian is a great blog and will do a much better job explaining those styles of play and how to do them a lot better than I can. But yeah, DCC lends itself really well to this sort of style of play because the core mechanics already work for sandbox games and that sort of thing. You can just take the core rules and then bolt on ones from OSR games. You can rip some out that don't work for you. You can make it more survivally. You can do a lot with it because it's very malleable, so it works really well for that style of play, which is already kind of a loosey-goosey kind of style of play, and you can just do that very easily and very well and have a really good experience mixing all the different things you want to make the perfect sort of OSR Frankenstein sandbox you can make. One thing to keep in mind though is that if you do use lots of the adventures sort of populated around, or if you are doing a more linear adventure, there is a lot of loot that you can find in a lot of the DCC dungeons, you know, where they have lots of jewels, or they have loads of gold, or just weird items, you know, that go for a lot of money. So one thing that you do want to keep in mind for most sandbox games, but especially if you're going to be using these DCC modules, you're going to want them to have stuff they can spend their gold on. Now you can also do gold for XP, which also works really well. That won't solve the issue of all the gold they're getting, but it will give it its own use, which is very useful, instead of using the base XP system, which is a very interesting system. I should talk about that another time, but the base XP system actually does work really well. I did use it when I was running Lightmar. Thought it actually did a pretty good job of it, but it is very slow. So you can switch for gold XP, which I've also done when I ran a Mega Dungeon, and so both work really well from my experience, so I can say that firsthand that I like both. They do change the game quite a bit with how much leveling can happen, depending on how much gold they're getting and everything else. But outside of gold for XP, there's also just stuff you might want them to be able to buy, you know, whether it's the classic of like, you know, land deeds and hirelings and businesses they might want to do, or, you know, paying contacts to give them information for new jobs, or, you know, paying bribes to the local factions, whatever it might be. There's lots of stuff you can make in the world to both flesh it out, as well as, you know, give them a reason to spend their money. Even stuff like investing into random local villagers could be fun. You know, if you have anybody that they like who might ask them for cash, they might try and, you know, build their own castle or their own church, or, you know, their own town or whatever it might be, or maybe they'll clear a dungeon, do the Forbidden Lands thing where you turn that into a stronghold. I would say definitely have these opportunities, and also bring this up if your players have lots of cash burning a hole in their pocket and they're kind of like, they don't really need cash, they don't really need to adventure because they have all this stuff. No, here's all these reasons that you should spend this money and why you should keep adventuring. In terms of filling out your sandbox with your own content, patrons are a fantastic source of both work and drama. If you do like a lot of moral dilemmas in your games and your group really does like having to, you know, debate with each other about why they're doing something, and if they like having that sort of, you know, back and forth, patrons are a great source for that because they can basically make them go like, oh, hey, like here's this really messed up thing I want you to do for me. I won't give you the reason as to why I'm making you do it, but if you do that, you'll have your debt repaid. Also, you can't say no, but your friends don't have to go with you. So that can lead to so many different things where it's like, are you gonna go on your own side adventure where either the GM plays with them on the side, or, you know, they just go off screen for a while? Do they fight over like, is this really worth it to your patron? Can't we do something else? There's a lot of different stuff you can do with that where it can lead to some really fun moments. But, you know, if you don't want that and you want a more casual game because you just, you know, play on Fridays with your friends to, you know, blow off steam after like a long week at work, or you guys just want to kick down doors and kill things together, the patrons can also just be a great source of really dangerous missions and really lucrative ones where, you know, it's like, oh, just go over here. I need you to gather this item for me. Also, in that dungeon, there'll also just be gold and loot and magic items and information or whatever it is, you know, that can benefit the rest of the party as well. So patrons are just a great organic content creating little entity that you can use all the time in your games. I love them for that. They're fantastic in sandbox games. Also, one little thing that I find kind of interesting specifically with DCC and how it's different with a sandbox compared to other games is that your wizards and your elves are kind of one-time nukes you can use. Now I say one-time, obviously it could be more than that depending on how strong the spell they use is, but a lot of times in sandbox games, because you want to make the world feel organic, you'll have, you know, different crazy monsters appear or really crazy encounters that normally the players should run away from. And in my experience, DCC characters tend to run away basically as much as OSC characters do or Worlds Outnumber characters do. But what's interesting is that depending on what mood your players are in, they might decide, no, this giant who's in our way might have some good stuff, and you know what, I have, you know, a 16 strength. I'm gonna burn a shitload here, and I'm gonna see if we can take this guy out and see what he's hiding, which is not a thing you can normally do in other games where you might not have the opportunity. You might be able to be smart and try and do something, but overall, the challenge is so overwhelming at the level you're at that it's not possible. So that is something that's fun too that you can think about in terms of creating weird encounters where most of the time they're just meant to be just like, oh hey, the world is real, not everything is based on your level. Like, you're gonna come across things that are just gonna beat you. If you see a dragon flying around the sky, you should hide. Don't try and get its attention at level 1, you're gonna die. But outside of that sort of stuff, it is fun to see what wizards and elves might do if they feel like, a little spell burn here and there. I'm sure I can handle this. And things could go horribly wrong where they end up running away anyway, or you could just have some really horrifying things happen to these poor creatures that they decide they have set their gaze upon. Either way, it should be interesting. And I do think that's something that is probably more DCC specific than you'd get in other games with a much more balanced magic system. In terms of more linear games, more like plot-driven games, like the way 5e has their giant campaigns where you have that sort of main story and it's more the plot pushes stuff forward and not so much the players. Well, I mean, I guess the players push it forward by doing the plot, but you know what I mean, where it's not like the players look to the right and go, we're going that way and we're doing it. It's more like, no, this person at the end of this thing, you can go around a little bit, but at the end of the day, you're going to end up, with Strahd or, Asarak or whatever the fuck that guy's name is. And that's where it's going to end. So with those sort of linear games, I do think you can run them DCC. If I'm in the mood for that kind of game, though, I will just run Shadow the Demon Lord. Overall, not that you can't do it, but I do think after I was done with 5e, until Shadow the Demon Lord, I didn't feel any need to do that with these games because I think they're way more designed for sandbox. But you can do it. It's actually not that hard because all you do is just have the plot, have the characters, and then you just sort of follow that storyline. It's pretty simple, and it's probably how a lot of people play DCC if they're coming from other games that do that sort of style more than sandbox. I would say the things to keep in mind for that, though, is depending on how you're pacing stuff. So, like, if you're having things really snappy, really good pacing, but, everything's happening within days of each other, the DCC healing isn't necessarily based well with that, especially if you're not using clerics, or like if clerics aren't in your party, like everybody went like, oh, I got a thief, I got a wizard, I got a warrior, and I got another thief. So like they didn't have a cleric, or you're not using Lightmar healing. Healing is the big thing you want to keep in mind because the healing rate is so low that you're probably gonna either want like an NPC healer or have healing be very available. Like if they're like in a city, have like an apothecary or a doctor available, or maybe healing potions being a commodity that you can just buy so that players will just have a bunch on them. Those are the sort of things you might want to keep in mind, where a lot of the mechanics are in the mind that the players kind of have control over what they're doing. But the thing that is sort of an issue with a story-driven game is that even though sure the players are in charge of that, and they are at the end of the day going to make all the choices that do matter, even in a linear story, they might be getting pushed along because they feel like, no, we need to keep moving. Like, things are ramping up, the story's getting crazy, there's RAM stuff happening because the GM's trying to make an interesting story that's engaging them. We can't stop, even though we're all down to like 2 luck, and the wizard is just like basically this, raisin on the side of the road here right now. We have to keep moving. You might just need to change how you pace certain things. You might want to give them more healing. You might want to just do like the 5e thing or yell your healing back every long rest, every night. That might be a bit much, but it really all just comes down to filling out how fast you're moving the story and what they're doing. It's more just finding that balance between how fast the story is moving and how much realistically these characters would keep going, regardless of how bad they're getting. I think that could also be really funny just watching them get so much weaker over time until they get to the end. That could end really badly with your players that end up not being a very fun thing at all for them. So just keep that in mind if you do linear play. So we're just gonna go over 4 settings because there's so many out there, but I just want to grab 4 that were different enough to show you the different sort of fancy styles you can do with this. So let's go through this list right now. So the first one we have is Hubris, and I'm gonna be pretty quick with this one because I've never actually run it. I have the book right here. I don't know if the camera will show it, but I have it right there. And that is a really cool setting. It's very grimdark. It's kind of like the sort of setting where, you read it and you go, oh, everything's miserable, life sucks. Everybody in this world's terrible, and there's, no point to life. Fucking count me in. Kind of like probably as close as you'll get to like Morkborg or Merkborg, however you pronounce it. There's some really cool art. There's loads of new classes. It's one I mostly flip through for inspiration or just when I'm bored, just sort of looking through it. It has some really fun art in it. It has great classes. It has loads of setting stuff. It has just a fantastic amount of content and just shows you how much different you can go with it. It's a very different, much more grim feel than even the more gritty style of a lot of the DCC stuff. The next one I'll cover, of course, is DCC Lightmar, because I can't stop talking about it. But this one is just such a fantastic setting. It's easily in my top 3 of like, if DCC is my favorite, DCC Lightmar is like my actual favorite of like how to play DCC. The urban campaigns are so much fun because I love urban campaigns more than anything else. There's no alignment, there's no clerics, so fucking perfect there for me. And also there's just fantastic adventures. Michael Curtis writes so many of them, and I think Michael Curtis might be like my favorite DCC author. Almost everything I've read by him, everything I've read by him, I've loved. It's run really great. He has some fantastic things. The scenarios for DCC Lightmar are fucking awesome. They're really easy to use for any urban campaign, and there's just loads of resources with the DCC Lightmar box set. So if you are trying to run urban games with DCC, like, just grab Lightmar. It'll have everything you need fully covered. Third, this is another one I haven't really had much exposure to outside of just, listening to podcasts on it, and that's the Shutter Mountain setting. I really, really love this setting. It's a sort of Appalachian kind of horror mixed with fantasy, and I love it so much. It's really cool. I believe Fear of a Black Dragon had a really good episode on the Chained Coffin, which is sort of this box set campaign made for the Shutter Mountains campaign setting, which I would love to do an AP of the Chained Coffin at some point. I think that'd be really fun to do, just a level 0 to level 5 campaign. I think it'd be a lot of fun. And I think one thing too with it is that because it's a first party one and it's one of their own, I just like that it really feels like Goodman Games doesn't want themselves to get boxed into just one kind of fantasy. It really shows you the different kinds of weird things you can do with it, because it's not like all that crazy and out there, but it is quite different from the base medieval setting, So I like that they're doing weird stuff and doing their own things. And that leads us to our last one, which of course is DCC Dying Earth, which is, as many people know, a weird fucking setting. I have, of course, not been able to run it just yet because I just got last week. And one of the great things about it is that it has all these cool things in it that is also a problem because I have other stuff I need to do. But I just want to look at the 9 scenarios that showed up with it. It has new classes. It has a load of new spells. It has all these new things, a bunch of stuff for the world building and just the weird gonzo nature of it. The new magic system is cool as fuck, and it's really, really interesting. Very excited to try that out. So that's another one there. I don't know when it's going to be available for retail if you didn't get on the Kickstarter, but I'm sure it won't be too long because it was a huge Kickstarter, and I'm already seeing Crypt of the Devil Lich stuff out in retail, so I can't imagine this one's going to be too far behind. So if you do want, I would say just keep your eye out for online retailers or your local store because they might be able to snag a copy. But with those 4, it shows you the variety and weirdness that's there. That's not even all the campaign settings I own, and there's so many out there. It is insane. Basically, the one big piece of advice I just want to nail into your head if you're somebody who's just looking to run a campaign at DCC is that the simplest answer is just start running stuff. A lot of times I get into a new RPG, I'll run one-on-one games with friends. I will run one-shots. I will build up to that campaign. So if you're getting new into this and you want to do a campaign, but you feel like, oh man, I really want to do this, but I can't do a campaign, that's too much, but you still want to do stuff, there's nothing wrong with one-shots. One-shots are a fantastic way to get used to a system, and then you'll get more comfortable, and it'll make you want to do more of it. So I will say right now that if you're somebody who's watching this, who's going, I want to do this, but I can't commit to that big of a thing, then don't commit to it. Just do some small stuff. Just do something. If your idea of I can't do a campaign means I can't do anything, or I won't run anything, or I'm too worried, grabbing a friend who's interested and being like, hey, can I just run this for you? Just make a character, whatever you want to do. We'll go through it and we'll just see how things go. It'll just be a really fun time. It's something I do a lot. I love one-on-one games. I did one for the channel. They are really fantastic times that are a really great way to learn the system because you don't have 4 different people trying to do everything at once. You just have that one other person and you can just get comfortable with that. And, there's not that feeling of an audience there with you, judging you, if that's a feeling that you have an issue with when it comes to a bigger group of people and you're jamming for them. One person makes it so much easier. The other thing too is that if you do end up doing a campaign, and you're worried about how things are going to go, just talk with your players, make those expectations clear where it's like, hey, this is going to be my first time running this, or things are subject to change. I might change the rulings on this. I might retcon certain choices I made. Mistakes are going to get made. We're just here to have fun. I mean, it is a game, right? At the end of the day, I know we in our hobbies take things really seriously. And I know with something like this where you make a character and you act out doing, different voices or just making something that feels close to you, it can become very intimate and very intense, and it can feel like it's a much bigger thing. But at the end of the day, we're just a bunch of idiots who are playing around our table. So just, chill out a bit. It's good. Just talk with your players about how things might change or how, whatever might go wrong. You guys are just going to roll with the punches and everything's going to be totally fine. Just get running games. And one thing too is that I do think a lot of people go online and they say what they want to do, and I think because people have these ideas of how you should be running DCC, and overall I would say the DCC community is a extremely friendly community, super friendly. There are so many nice people that I've met from playing this game. I made so many new friends, and they're all people who love getting new people in the hobby, are so excited to have new people playing that sort of stuff. But I do still think there is that level of any sort of group or community or fandom or however you want to call it, that there's a way to do certain things. And even with how loosey-goosey DCC is, there is this level of most things are okay, but here are a few things we don't allow. And I'm just going to say, if you want to do those things, fuck them. Now, it is good to imagine why they're saying those things. They might have merit. There might be things where they're like, oh, I did the thing you want to do. It doesn't work because here's what happened. Or, well, keep in mind, if you do that, I ran into these issues and that was a big problem for my group. So those are good things to listen to. But at the end of the day, it's your game, your table, your friends. So if it's something that you want to do and others are saying it's a bad way to do it, listen to that. But at the same time, just do what you want. See how it goes. Learn for yourself what doesn't work, because that is the best way you're going to get better at GMing. I learned more from my first campaign I ran when I first started becoming a GM than I've ever learned at any other point in my RPG career. It is, that was one hell of a doozy of a campaign that I will definitely have to talk about more at a later time. But that is how you learn. You just go through these really, really weird and rough games, and then you learn from it. So I believe in you. You can do it. Just get out there and play. So hopefully you did get something out of this, and thank you so much for watching. Right now I started a new podcast called the Abundant Games Podcast. It's an RPG one where I basically just ramble and talk about stuff. Right now there's only one episode on YouTube, so you can watch it there. And though you can also get over in podcast form. So you can get wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify, whatever. You can get your podcast there as well. When I have so much work going on, it's an easy one to just, record some stuff, talk about some RPG randomness while I'm doing these big projects. So if you do like that sort of thing, check it out, share it, usual stuff. If you want to support me, I do have a Patreon. That's always welcome. You get videos a day early, you get, an extra role in the Discord, and you get a few other things, like polls and other stuff. The patrons are the ones who vote for this video, so thank you so much to my patrons, and thank you so much for everybody who's watching. Everything you guys do is great. Oh, and I guess since it's been here the whole time, my buddy 3D printed this for me, which was just a very, very funny gift, and thank you so much, Chris. But anyway, outside of that, I hope you guys have a good one, and stay safe out there.